City. Well, let's speak now to Yaakov Katz, former editor of the Jerusalem Post and senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute, who joins me from Jerusalem. Welcome to you, Yaakov. Thank you very much for being with us. Let's start on the potential for this offensive in Rafah. And we've got satellite images which show this tent build-up in Khan Yunis, which we understand is possibly part of this plan for Israel to move people, refugees, out of Rafah and into that area. What do you understand about what the IDF, the government policy, might be?
The government and the security cabinet are basically meeting, I think, as we speak, Samantha, to discuss what they should do in terms of continuing with this long anticipated offensive in Rafah, where we know that there's about 4 to 5 Hamas battalions that are still standing. The last remaining fully organized Hamas military units. There's about 15,000 armed terrorists who are there. Also in Rafah are a series of tunnels that Hamas has used along the border with Egypt to smuggle in advanced and sophisticated Iranian weaponry. But what Israel has said is that it would first want to try to move some of those displaced Palestinians, people who moved from the north of Gaza down to the south when the war and the ground offensive first began after the October 7th Hamas attack. And therefore, that's why we're seeing those tents being erected in the Khan Yunis area. So when Israel goes in, if it does go into Rafah, it's hoping that with some corridors that it will create for safe passage, people will start to move north to other places out of harm's way.
Yeah, we're just going to look at a map of the area and where they could be moved to in the tents that have appeared. The US National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, has said the White House has told Israel there is a different way to deal with the Hamas threat in Rafah, so acknowledging very much that it is there. What do you understand that could look like? What options are possibly on the table for the Security Cabinet right now?
Well, the Americans have acknowledged two things. One is that they understand why Israel feels the need to continue the offensive in Rafah, because at the end of the day, you still have a significant Hamas force that is standing. We still have 133 Israeli hostages who are being held in Gaza, likely many of them in the Rafah area, alongside the top Hamas leadership. So they fully understand the need for this operation to continue. What they're arguing with Israel about, or where they're trying to impress upon Israel, is that maybe instead of a large-scale ground offensive, try to carry out this operation in a more pinpointed precision style. The problem is that when you're dealing with such a significant force that's blended into the civilian regular population, like Hamas, we know, likes to hide behind civilian and human shields, it becomes very difficult to do this in a very precise way, especially when you have so many civilians who have been displaced to that area. So what Israel's trying to do, and we'll see if it will succeed, is move out the mass majority of those displaced people, try to sterilize the area as much as possible that remaining are just the combatants of Hamas, and then prosecute the final aspect or leg of this long war that we've been fighting for the last more than 6 months.
And do you have any confidence they will be able to move more than 1 million people who are seeking shelter in Rafah out before they do begin any assault?
It's very complicated, Samantha. There's no question about that. I think what we've seen is the way Israel has waged and prosecuted its ground offensive since the beginning. Israel fights in a way that no other military does in the world, dropping leaflets, making cell phone calls, sending messages, giving people weeks in advance to leave an area. We'll see if they'll do that this time as well. But I have very strong confidence in the IDF's ability to distinguish as much as possible between civilians and combatants. We've seen that throughout this conflict, and Israel has constantly and persistently always fought with a very clear, decisive objective of doing all it can to minimize the harm to the local civilian population.
Yeah, and yet the number of dead, many of them civilians, is more than 30,000, according to the Hamas-run Gazan Health Ministry. So huge numbers of innocent people have been killed. Israel says it does its best to protect the innocent. But as that number of dead rises, sadly, and if it does go into Rafah and we see possibly a significant rise again, you've already seen in recent months Israel lose the confidence and, if not outright support, then certainly some support from some of its closest allies. You've seen criticism from the US, from the UK. Are you worried that going into Rafah, an assault there, could further weaken the support from Israel's key allies?
Well, of course I'm worried about that, and we've seen how the support over time and over the last 6.5 months has eroded. But let me just say one thing about the numbers. While Hamas claims 30,000, Israel claims that almost half of them are combatants. So we are actually looking at a 1-to-1 ratio of combatants to civilians, which is really unprecedented, Samantha, in any type of urban warfare or literally any military operation that's ever been fought in the world. But back to the idea of what will happen if Israel goes ahead with this, it's true. Israel will face a growing international community that is going to say, we're against this. We don't want this. We don't support that. With that said, Israel and the government that's now meeting as we speak has a basic mission, right? Which is it has to protect the state of Israel. That is why it's in power, and that is what its objective is. And therefore, they have a very tough decision to make now.
Okay, Yaakov Katz, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us.